Marcus Hayes stood at the edge of the property and looked at the broken building in front of him. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but water still dripped from the rotting roof. The walls leaned to one side like a drunk man trying to stand. Windows were missing their glass and the door hung crooked on rusty hinges. This was it. This was what remained of his fortune. A shack in the middle of nowhere that most people would tear down rather than try to fix. He pulled his coat tighter and walked toward it. The year was 2187, and Earth had changed more in the last 30 years than in the previous 300. Aliens were real. They had arrived with ships that could cross galaxies and technology that seemed like magic. The Galactic Coalition, they called it. Hundreds of species working together for peace and prosperity. At least that was what they said. Marcus had believed it once. He had believed in a lot of things once. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Mold and rot and years of abandonment. The floor creaked under his boots. He set down his pack and looked around. One room with a fireplace that probably did not work. A smaller room in the back that might have been a bedroom. No electricity. No running water. No connection to the planetary network that linked every human on Earth. Perfect. This was exactly what he wanted. A place where nobody could find him. A place where he could disappear. Marcus was 42 years old, but he felt older. Much older. His face was lined with exhaustion, and his eyes held a darkness that had not been there 3 years ago. 3 years since the accident. 3 years since Station Meridian had torn itself apart and taken 200 lives with it. 3 years since he had watched his wife Elena die in the cold vacuum of space while he floated helpless in an escape pod. The coalition had cleared him of wrongdoing. The official report said it was a cascade failure in the life support systems. Nobody could have predicted it. Nobody could have stopped it. But the Galactic Court of Ethics had other ideas. They said his mining methods were too aggressive, too human, too reckless. They fined him everything he had and more. The media tore him apart. Former hero becomes killer. Billionaire's greed costs lives. Earth's shame. He had stopped reading after the first week. His company collapsed. His friends vanished. His home was seized to pay the fines. Everything he had built over 20 years was gone in months. So he took what little remained and bought this place. 20 acres of forest in the Appalachian Wilderness Zone. One of the few places on Earth where the Coalition surveillance network had gaps. Where a man could be alone with his ghosts. Marcus spent the first 2 days just trying to make the shack livable. He patched the worst holes in the roof with plastic sheeting from his pack. He cleared out the debris and dead animals. He got the fireplace working after cleaning out years of bird nests. At night, he lay on the floor in his sleeping bag and stared at the ceiling. Sleep came in brief moments filled with dreams of Elena, her smile, her laugh, the way she used to tease him about working too hard, the way she had looked at him in those final seconds before the station blew apart. He would wake up gasping and covered in sweat. Then he would lie there in the darkness and wait for morning. On the third day, he decided to explore the property. The forest was thick with old-growth trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. Vines and undergrowth made walking difficult. He found a creek about a quarter-mile from the shack. The water was clear and cold. He filled his canteen and drank. It tasted better than anything that came from the recyclers in the city. That was when he heard it. A baby crying. Marcus froze. The sound came from somewhere downstream, thin and weak but unmistakable. He moved toward it slowly. His heart hammered in his chest. Who would bring a baby out here? This land was supposed to be empty, abandoned. That was why he had bought it. The crying grew louder. He pushed through a tangle of bushes and stopped. There was a shelter built into the side of a fallen tree. Just a hole in the ground covered with branches and leaves. Someone had dug it by hand. He knelt down and peered inside. 2 infants lay on a bed of moss and cloth. They were maybe 6 months old. Their skin was dark brown and their faces were scrunched up in distress. But they were alive. Beside them was a young woman. She stared at Marcus with eyes full of fear and fury. She held a knife made from a sharpened piece of metal. Her hand shook, but her grip was firm. Marcus raised his hand slowly. He did not speak. Words seemed wrong somehow. The woman did not lower the knife. She was thin, too thin. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Her hair was matted. She looked like she had been living out here for weeks, maybe longer. One of the babies started crying again. The woman glanced down for just a second. Marcus took a step back. He kept his hands up where she could see them. Then he turned and walked away. Behind him, the woman said nothing. He could feel her eyes on his back until he was out of sight. When he got back to the shack, he sat on the porch and tried to make sense of what he had seen. A woman and 2 babies hiding in the forest, running from something, or someone. It was not his problem. He had come here to be alone, to escape. Getting involved would only bring trouble. But that night he could not stop thinking about them, about how thin the woman had looked, about the babies crying in the cold. The next morning, Marcus packed some of his food into a bag: dried protein bars, water purification tablets, a thermal blanket. He walked back to the creek and found the shelter. The woman was awake. She watched him approach with the same suspicious eyes. He set the bag down about 10 feet away from her. Then he backed up and left without saying a word. He did this for 3 days. Each morning he would leave supplies. Each morning she would watch him but never speak. On the 4th day she was gone from the shelter. Marcus felt a moment of panic. Had something happened? Had she moved on? Then he saw her. She was sitting on a rock by the creek. The babies were wrapped against her chest in a makeshift sling. She looked at him, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice was hoarse from disuse. She said her name was Zara Patterson. She said she had been running for 4 months. She did not say from what, not yet. Marcus introduced himself. He did not mention who he was or what he had done. Out here, none of that mattered. He asked if she needed help. She hesitated. Then she nodded. He told her about the shack. It was not much, but it had a roof and walls. It was better than a hole in the ground. She looked at him for a long time, searching his face for something. Trust, maybe, or honesty. Whatever she saw must have been enough, because she stood up. She gathered her few belongings and followed him back through the forest. When they reached the shack, she stopped at the door. Marcus could see her calculating, weighing her options. Then she stepped inside. He showed her the back room. It was small, but it was dry. She laid the babies down carefully, and they immediately fell asleep. The relief on her face was painful to watch. That night they sat by the fire. Marcus heated water for tea using leaves he had found in the forest. It was bitter but warm. Zara drank it slowly. She held the cup like it was precious. Then she started to talk. She told him she had been a researcher. Medical genetics. She worked in a coalition lab in New Atlanta. They were studying human DNA, looking at why humans could adapt so quickly to different environments, why they healed faster than most species, why they could survive conditions that would kill others. It was supposed to be peaceful research, scientific. But Zara had found something else, files that were not supposed to exist, videos of experiments on human subjects, children, adults, people who had disappeared from the streets and ended up in secret labs. The coalition was harvesting human genetic material. They were using it to create enhanced soldiers, warriors that could fight longer and harder than any natural being. When Zara reported what she had found, her lab was raided the next day. Men in coalition uniforms came with weapons. They killed her supervisor. They tried to kill her. She barely escaped with the babies. Her partner had been killed weeks earlier trying to protect them. She had been moving ever since, sleeping in abandoned buildings, stealing food, avoiding the drones that searched for her. She made it to the wilderness because she thought they would not look here. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stared into the fire. Everything she said matched with things he had suspected but never wanted to believe. The coalition was not the peaceful alliance they pretended to be. They were using humanity, exploiting them. And anyone who found out was eliminated. He looked at Zara. She was exhausted, broken, but there was steel in her eyes. She had survived this long because she refused to give up. Marcus recognized that quality. He had lost it 3 years ago, but seeing it in her made something stir inside him, something he thought was dead. He told her she could stay as long as she needed. He would help her. He did not know how yet, but he would figure it out. For the first time since Elena died, Marcus Hayes had a purpose beyond his own pain. The first week passed in a strange rhythm. Marcus woke before dawn each day and worked on making the shack more livable. He found old boards in the forest from a collapsed barn and used them to patch the walls. He rigged a rainwater collection system using plastic containers and gutters made from cut metal. Zara stayed close to the babies. She was still weak from months of running and hiding, but slowly her strength returned. She helped where she could. organizing their supplies, keeping the fire going, making sure Kai and Luna were fed and warm. The twins were fraternal. Kai was slightly bigger with curious eyes that followed everything. Luna was smaller but louder. She cried when she was hungry and laughed when Marcus made funny faces at her. He found himself doing that more often than he expected, making them smile. It eased something in his chest that had been tight for years. One evening, as they ate a simple meal of rice and beans, Zara asked Marcus about himself. He had been avoiding the question. Talking about his past meant reliving it. But she had trusted him with her story. He owed her the same. So he told her. About the mining company he had built from nothing. About the innovations that made asteroid mining profitable. About the wealth and success that followed. About Elena. About the accident on Station Meridian. About how the coalition had destroyed everything he had left. Zara listened without judgment. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that surprised him. She said pain was proof of love. That carrying it meant the love had not died. That Elena would want him to live, not just survive. Marcus did not know what to say to that. So he just nodded and changed the subject. But her words stayed with him. On the 10th day, everything changed. Marcus was outside chopping wood when he heard it. A low hum in the sky. He looked up and saw a coalition surveillance drone passing overhead. It was an older model, probably part of a routine sweep. But Zara came running out of the shack with panic in her eyes. She recognized the signature. She had seen too many of them during her months on the run. The drone passed without slowing. It did not seem to notice them. But Zara was shaking. She said they needed to leave now. The coalition would send more. They always did. Marcus grabbed her shoulders gently. He told her to breathe. Running would only make them easier to track. They needed a plan. Zara looked at him like he was crazy. What plan could possibly work against the coalition? They had technology beyond anything humans fully understood. They had resources that spanned galaxies. What could two people in a broken shack possibly do? Marcus thought about that. She was right. In a straight fight, they had no chance. But he had not survived 20 years in the cutthroat world of space mining by fighting fair. He had survived by being smart, by knowing when to adapt, by using what he had instead of wishing for what he did not. He told Zara to pack only what they absolutely needed. Then he went to his pack and pulled out something he had sworn never to use again, a quantum communicator. Small, encrypted, connected to networks that most people did not know existed. He powered it on and sent a single coded message. To a man he had not spoken to in 3 years. A man who had once been his head of security and closest friend. Colonel Adrian Blake, if Blake was still alive. If he was still running the underground network Marcus had heard rumors about. If he even remembered Marcus after everything that had happened. Then maybe they had a chance. The response came 2 hours later. A burst of encrypted data that downloaded into the communicator. Blake was alive, and he was interested. The message was brief. He had heard about Zara, about what she had discovered. The resistance needed that information. If Marcus could get Zara to safety, Blake would send help. There was an underground facility 3 days' travel north. Coordinates followed. Marcus showed the message to Zara. She read it twice. Then she looked at him with suspicion. How did he know these people? How did he know they could be trusted? Marcus admitted he did not know if they could be trusted. Blake had been a good man once. But 3 years was a long time. People changed. Circumstances changed. All Marcus had was a gut feeling. And right now that gut feeling said their only chance was to move. Zara looked at the twins, then back at Marcus. She nodded. They left that night. Marcus took only what he could carry. Food, water, the communicator, a few tools. Zara wrapped the twins in thermal blankets and carried them in her makeshift sling. They moved through the forest slowly. Marcus led the way using an old compass and the downloaded coordinates. The terrain was rough. Hills rose and fell in endless succession. Streams cut through valleys. Twice they had to hide when they heard aircraft overhead. Coalition transports, probably. Searching. By dawn they were exhausted. Marcus found a cave carved into a hillside. They rested there during the day. The twins were fussy from the travel. Zara tried to soothe them, but she was running on empty herself. Marcus took Kai and held him awkwardly. He had never been good with babies. But Kai seemed to sense the effort and settled down. Luna followed her brother's lead and quieted. Zara fell asleep almost immediately. Marcus stayed awake and watched the cave entrance. His mind would not stop working, calculating risks, planning contingencies, wondering if he was making a terrible mistake. On the second night, they heard something that made Marcus's blood run cold. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Moving through the forest with purpose, he woke Zara silently and pointed. She understood immediately. They gathered the twins and pressed themselves against the back of the cave. Marcus held a knife he had brought from the shack. It would be useless against coalition weapons, but it was all he had. The footsteps came closer. Voices spoke in a language Marcus did not recognize. Alien. Then a flashlight beam swept across the cave entrance. Marcus held his breath. The light moved on. The voices faded. They waited an hour before moving. When they finally emerged, the forest was silent again. But Marcus knew they had been close. Too close. They needed to move faster. The third day brought them to a river. It was too wide to cross easily. Marcus searched along the bank and found an old bridge. The wood was rotted but still standing. They crossed one at a time. Marcus went first to test the boards. Then Zara with the twins. Halfway across, a board cracked under her weight. She stumbled. Marcus lunged forward and caught her arm. They froze. The board held. Barely. They moved slower after that. When they reached the other side, Zara sat down hard. Her hands were shaking. Marcus knelt beside her. He told her they were close. Just a few more miles. She nodded but did not speak. The exhaustion was written all over her face. Marcus wanted to let her rest longer, but they did not have time. He helped her up and they kept moving. They reached the coordinates as the sun was setting on the third day. At first, Marcus thought they had made a mistake. There was nothing there, just more forest. But then he saw it, a small marker carved into a tree trunk, an arrow pointing down. He followed the direction and found a metal hatch hidden under leaves and dirt. He pulled it open. Steps led down into darkness. Zara looked at him. This was it, the point of no return. If they went down, they were committing to Blake's network, to the resistance, to a fight against the coalition. Marcus thought about Elena, about what she would do. She had always believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was dangerous, even when it was impossible. He climbed down. Zara followed. The tunnel was narrow and cold. Emergency lights flickered along the walls. They walked for what felt like miles. Then the tunnel opened into a larger space, a room carved out of rock and reinforced with metal beams. A dozen people were there, some in military gear, some in civilian clothes, all of them armed. A man stepped forward. He was tall with graying hair and a scar across his left cheek. Adrian Blake. He looked older than Marcus remembered, harder. But his eyes were the same, sharp and calculating. He looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had just gained a valuable piece in a dangerous game. Blake said it had been a long time. Marcus agreed. Blake looked at Zara and the twins, then back at Marcus. He said they had a lot to talk about. Over the next hours, Blake explained everything. The resistance was bigger than Marcus had imagined. Hundreds of people spread across North America. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, all working to undermine coalition control. They had been monitoring Zara since she escaped the lab. They knew about her research. They needed it. The information she had could expose coalition crimes to the entire galaxy. Species that thought they were part of a peaceful alliance would learn the truth, that they were being manipulated, that humans were being exploited and experimented on. It could fracture the coalition, maybe even destroy it. But they needed proof, documentation, evidence that could not be denied. Zara had that evidence. Blake wanted it. Marcus asked what Blake would do with it. Blake said he would make sure the right people saw it, people who could act on it. Marcus did not fully trust Blake, but he did not have better options. He looked at Zara. The decision was hers. She looked at the twins sleeping in her arms. Then she looked at Blake. She said she would give him everything, but only if he promised to protect her children. Blake extended his hand. Zara shook it. The alliance was formed. The underground facility was bigger than it looked from the entrance room. Blake led them through corridors carved into bedrock. They passed storage areas filled with supplies. sleeping quarters where off-duty resistance members rested, a medical bay with equipment that looked surprisingly advanced. Blake explained that they had supporters in high places. People within the coalition who disagreed with what was happening, but could not speak out openly. They donated money and equipment, information. Sometimes they looked the other way when resistance operations happened. It was a delicate balance. One wrong move could expose the whole network. Marcus listened and felt a growing respect for what Blake had built. This was not just a group of angry humans hiding in the dark. This was an organized movement. Disciplined, strategic, dangerous. Blake brought them to a secure room where 3 people waited. Commander Lisa Ford stood at attention. She had short black hair and eyes that looked like they had seen too much war. She had been a Navy officer before the coalition integration. When Earth joined the galactic community, she was reassigned to joint operations with alien forces. What she saw there made her sick. Coalition ships attacking peaceful colonies. Experiments on captured prisoners. She tried to report it through proper channels. They threatened to court-martial her, so she deserted and found Blake. Dr. Henry Liu was next, thin and nervous with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He was a physicist who had worked on quantum drive systems. The coalition wanted him to weaponize his research, turn it into something that could tear holes in space and destroy entire planets. He refused. They tried to force him. He escaped with his research and burned everything behind him. The last was Sergeant Malik Green, built like a tank with scars covering his arms. He had been Special Forces. His team was sent to eliminate a group of human refugees who knew too much about coalition black sites. He was ordered to kill children. Instead, he killed his commanding officer and got the refugees to safety. He had been with Blake ever since. Lisa looked at Marcus with cold evaluation. She knew who he was. Everyone did. The man who got rich mining asteroids. The man who got people killed. The man who ran away when things got hard. She asked Blake why they should trust him. Marcus did not defend himself. He understood her anger. Blake spoke instead. He said Marcus had resources they needed. Contacts in the merchant fleets, knowledge of coalition infrastructure, skills that could help them. Lisa was not convinced. She turned to Zara. She asked what Zara had found. Zara took a breath and began explaining. She talked about the genetic experiments, about how the coalition was harvesting human DNA to create enhanced soldiers, about the secret labs where people disappeared, about the black operations these soldiers were used for, subjugating worlds that refused coalition authority, assassinating leaders who spoke out. Lisa's expression changed from skepticism to fury. Dr. Liu looked physically ill. Malik clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. Zara pulled out a small data chip. She had sewn it into the lining of her clothes months ago. Everything was on there. Video evidence, genetic sequences, internal coalition communications, financial records showing who funded the programs, names of officials involved. It was enough to bring down governments, maybe enough to fracture the coalition itself. Dr. Liu took the chip carefully like it was made of glass. He plugged it into a secure terminal and began examining the data. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of the computer. Minutes passed. Then Liu looked up. His face was pale. He said it was worse than they thought. The experiments were not limited to a few labs. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, spread across coalition space. Thousands of humans had been taken. Most were never seen again. The genetic material harvested from them was being used to create an army the coalition could use to enforce their will on any species that stepped out of line. Marcus asked the obvious question. Why? Why would the coalition need an army of enhanced soldiers? They already had overwhelming military superiority. Blake had a theory. The coalition was fracturing from within. Many member species were growing tired of the authoritarian control, of the corruption, of the favoritism shown to certain species over others. There were whispers of secession, of rebellion. The coalition leadership knew they could not hold the alliance together through diplomacy anymore. So they were preparing for war. Civil war. Species against species. Worlds burning. And they wanted soldiers who could crush any resistance. Soldiers who could survive anything. Human soldiers. Lisa said they needed to get this information out. Broadcast it across every network in coalition space. Let everyone see what was happening. Malik agreed, but Blake shook his head. He said it was not that simple. The coalition controlled the major communication channels. Any transmission would be intercepted and scrubbed before it reached most people. They needed a different approach, Marcus spoke up. He said they needed to go to the source, to take the evidence directly to coalition members who would act on it. Species that still believed in the ideals the coalition was supposed to represent. Blake asked who. Marcus thought about it. He had dealt with hundreds of alien species during his mining days. Most were as corrupt as humans, but some were different. The Valkorians valued truth above all else. They were philosophers and peacekeepers. If they saw this evidence, they would demand action. The Thalaxians were even more rigid. Their entire society was built on ethical principles. They would be horrified by the experiments. If Marcus could get to them, if he could show them proof, they would force the coalition to respond. Blake considered this. Then he asked the hard question. How would Marcus reach them? Earth was monitored. Leaving the planet meant passing through coalition security. They would be caught before they reached orbit. Marcus smiled. It was not a happy smile. He said he still had friends in the smuggling trade. People who moved goods through coalition space without asking questions. They operated out of orbital platforms and neutral stations. If he could reach them, they would take him anywhere for the right price. Blake raised an eyebrow. He asked what price. Marcus admitted he had no money left. But he had something better. Information. Routes through asteroid fields. Locations of mineral deposits. Codes that would bypass certain security systems. Knowledge that smugglers would kill for. Blake was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. It could work. But it was risky. If Marcus got caught, the coalition would make him disappear. If the smugglers betrayed him, he would be sold to the highest bidder. Marcus looked at Zara. He looked at Kai and Luna sleeping peacefully in her arms. He said some things were worth the risk. Lisa stepped forward. She said if they were doing this, they needed to do it right. She would assign a team to go with Marcus. People who knew how to fight, how to survive, how to get out when things went wrong. Marcus started to object, but Blake cut him off. Blake said Lisa was right. This was too important to leave to chance. Marcus would have backup whether he liked it or not. Lisa assigned 2 people. Corporal Nina Harper was young but skilled in communications and encryption. She could keep them hidden from coalition surveillance. Lieutenant Alex Chen was a pilot who had flown everything from fighters to cargo haulers. If they needed to leave fast, he could get them out. Marcus looked at the 2 soldiers. Nina smiled nervously. Alex just nodded. They were putting their lives in his hands. He hoped he was worth it. Over the next 3 days, they prepared. Zara worked with Dr. Liu to organize the research data. They compressed it into multiple formats, encrypted it, created backup copies hidden in different locations. If one copy was destroyed, they would still have others. Nina worked on creating false identities, documents that would get them through coalition security, travel permits, work visas, medical records. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake would flag them in the system. Alex studied transport schedules. He found a window. A cargo hauler leaving for the orbital platform in 6 days. They could blend in with the crew if they timed it right. Malik trained Marcus in basic combat, hand-to-hand, weapons handling, how to move silently, how to survive an ambush. Marcus was rusty, but the skills came back slowly. He would never be a soldier, but he might survive long enough to matter. On the 4th night, Zara found Marcus alone in one of the corridors. She thanked him for what he was doing. He brushed it off, said it was nothing. She looked at him hard. She said it was not nothing. He was risking his life for people he barely knew. For children that were not his. Marcus did not know how to respond to that. He changed the subject. Asked about the twins. Zara smiled. She said they were growing stronger, healthier. For the first time since they were born, she felt like they might actually survive. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He realized he wanted them to survive, not just because it was right, but because he cared about them, about Zara, about having something to fight for again. He told Zara he would come back. He would get the evidence to the right people, and he would come back. She touched his arm gently. She said she believed him. The next morning, Blake called a meeting. He had received intelligence that changed everything. Coalition forces were sweeping the region. They were searching for Zara for the research. They knew she was somewhere in the area, They left the facility through a different tunnel system. This one led to an abandoned subway station in what used to be Baltimore. The station was dark and smelled like rust and decay. Water dripped from cracks in the ceiling. Nina led the way with a small flashlight. Alex followed with their gear. Marcus brought up the rear, watching for any signs of pursuit. They emerged into the city above through a maintenance hatch hidden behind an old building. The streets were empty. It was 3 a.m. Perfect timing. A vehicle waited for them. An old electric van that looked like it should have been scrapped decades ago. But when Alex started the engine, it purred smoothly. Blake had people everywhere. They drove north toward the transport hub. Marcus watched the city pass by through dirty windows. He had not been to Baltimore in years. Like most cities, it had changed after the coalition arrived. Buildings that used to house human businesses now displayed alien script. Shops that sold goods from across the galaxy. Humans walked the streets alongside beings from 100 different worlds. It should have been beautiful, a symbol of unity. Instead, it felt like occupation. They reached the transport hub just before dawn. It was massive. Thousands of workers moved through security checkpoints heading to their shifts. Marcus and his team blended in with a group of cargo handlers. Nina had gotten them work permits that identified them as freight movers. The permits had been used before by actual workers. The identities were solid. They passed through the first checkpoint without issue. Then the second. At the third, a coalition security officer stopped them. He was Cravathi, the reptilian species that served as enforcers across coalition space. His eyes were cold and calculating. He scanned their permits slowly. Too slowly. Marcus felt sweat building on his back. The Cravathi looked at Nina, asked her a question in heavily accented English. Where was she working today? Nina answered without hesitation. Bay 7. Loading agricultural supplies. The Cravathi stared at her. Then he waved them through. Marcus did not relax until they were out of sight. Bay 7 was exactly where Nina said it would be. Cargo containers were being loaded onto a massive shuttle. Workers moved in organized chaos, shouting orders, operating loading equipment. Marcus and his team grabbed equipment vests and joined the flow. Nobody questioned them. Nobody cared. They were just more bodies doing the grunt work. Alex located the shuttle they needed. It was scheduled to launch in 2 hours. They worked their way closer, loading containers, acting like they belonged. When the supervisor was not looking, they slipped into the cargo hold, found a space behind a stack of supply crates, made themselves as comfortable as possible. Then they waited. The cargo hold filled slowly. More crates, more containers. The noise was constant. Metal scraping on metal, machinery whirring, voices shouting. Finally, the loading stopped. The hold doors sealed. The engines powered up. Marcus felt the shuttle lift. They were leaving Earth. The flight to the orbital platform took 3 hours. The cargo hold was cold and dark. Marcus tried to sleep, but his mind would not stop. He kept thinking about Zara and the twins, about whether they were safe, about what would happen if he failed. Nina sat with her eyes closed, but Marcus could tell she was not sleeping. Alex checked his equipment obsessively, making sure everything was ready. When the shuttle finally docked, they waited for the cargo to be unloaded. Then they slipped out with a group of workers. The orbital platform was bigger than Marcus remembered. Sections had been added since he was last here. New docking bays, expanded living quarters, shops and restaurants catering to every species imaginable. They made their way through the crowds carefully. 3 humans in work gear attracted no attention, just more laborers in a station full of them. Marcus led them to a section of the station where official oversight was minimal. This was where smugglers and independent traders operated, where deals happened that no government wanted to acknowledge. The bars here were dim and loud, filled with beings who asked no questions as long as you paid your tab. Marcus found the one he was looking for, a place called The Void. He had been here a dozen times during his mining days. The owner was a human named Captain Raymond Pierce, a hard man who had made his fortune moving cargo that others would not touch. Legal or not, Marcus walked in and immediately felt eyes on him. This was not a place where strangers were welcome. He spotted Pierce at a corner table. The captain was older now, gray streaked through his beard, but he still had the same sharp eyes. Marcus walked over. Pierce looked up and his expression changed from suspicion to surprise to something like amusement. Pierce said he thought Marcus was dead. Marcus said he almost was. Pierce laughed. A rough sound like grinding gravel. He gestured for Marcus to sit. Asked what brought him to the void. Marcus got straight to the point. He needed passage to Terminus Station. No questions asked. No records kept. Pierce leaned back in his chair. He said Terminus was dangerous territory. Coalition patrols, pirates, worse things. Why would Marcus want to go there? Marcus did not answer directly. He said he had information Pierce might find valuable. Mining routes, mineral deposits, security codes. Pierce raised an eyebrow. He asked how valuable. Marcus told him. Enough to make Pierce rich, or richer. Pierce considered this. Then he said he already had enough money. What he did not have was people he could trust. And Marcus had once done him a favor. Years ago, when Pierce's ship had been blacklisted by a major corporation, Marcus had used his influence to get the blacklist lifted. Pierce had not forgotten. He said he would take Marcus to Terminus, but only because of that old debt. After this, they were even. Pierce's ship was called the Wanderer. It was old and battered, but Marcus knew better than to judge a ship by appearances. Pierce maintained his vessels obsessively. What looked like rust and decay on the outside hid cutting-edge engines and weapon systems inside. They boarded 2 hours later. Pierce introduced them to his crew. His first mate was a woman named Caroline who looked like she could break Marcus in half. His engineer was a quiet man named Devon who barely spoke. There were others. 6 in total. All of them looked like they had seen their share of trouble. The Wanderer undocked and moved away from the platform. Once they were clear, Pierce engaged the hyperspace drive. Reality twisted. Stars stretched into lines. Then they were moving faster than light. The journey to Terminus would take 3 weeks. Life on the Wanderer fell into a routine. Marcus spent his days in the small quarters Pierce had assigned him. The space was cramped but private. He used the time to review Zara's research, to memorize the key points, to prepare arguments that might convince alien diplomats to act. Nina worked on securing their communications, making sure any messages they sent could not be intercepted. Alex studied maps of Terminus Station, planning routes, identifying safe zones, escape paths if things went wrong. At night, they ate together in the ship's galley. Pierce's crew was curious about them, but respected the unspoken rule not to ask too many questions. Caroline did mention once that Marcus looked familiar, like she had seen his face before. Marcus deflected, said he had one of those faces. She did not push, but he could see the suspicion in her eyes. 2 weeks into the journey, they stopped at a refueling station, a small outpost orbiting a dead moon. Pierce needed to top off the fuel reserves and pick up supplies. Marcus and his team were allowed to stretch their legs, but warned not to cause trouble. The station was busy. Ships from across Coalition space docked here. It was neutral territory, a place where enemies could cross paths without bloodshed. Marcus was walking through the market when he noticed someone watching him. An elderly alien, bird-like features with feathers in shades of blue and silver. A Velkorian. Marcus recognized the species immediately. The alien approached slowly. She introduced herself as Saren, a diplomat with no official status anymore. She had retired years ago, disillusioned with coalition politics. But she still paid attention. She still cared. She asked Marcus why he looked so troubled. Marcus almost walked away. But something in her eyes made him stop. A kindness. A genuine concern. Marcus took a chance. He told her he was carrying information about coalition corruption, about crimes that needed to be exposed. Saren listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said she had suspected something like this for years. The Velkorians prided themselves on seeking truth. But within the coalition, they had become just another voice drowned out by the louder, more aggressive species. She asked what Marcus planned to do with the information. He explained about Terminus, about trying to reach sympathetic diplomats. Saren nodded slowly. She said she still had contacts, people who would listen. If Marcus could get to Terminus, she would send word ahead. Arrange meetings, give him a chance to be heard. Marcus asked why she would help him. Saren smiled. A sad expression. She said because someone had to, because silence in the face of evil was itself evil. She gave Marcus a small device, a communicator with encrypted codes. She told him to contact her when he reached Terminus. The last week of the journey was tense. Marcus could feel the pressure building. Once they reached Terminus, there would be no turning back. They would be committed. Nina noticed his anxiety. She told him it was normal. Everyone felt this way before a mission. Terminus Station was a maze. Corridors twisted in directions that made no logical sense. Some sections had artificial gravity. Others did not. Signs were written in a dozen languages, and half of them contradicted each other. Marcus followed the map Alex had prepared, but even with guidance, they got turned around twice. Nina kept her hand near her weapon. There were no official security forces on Terminus. Justice was handled by whoever had the most firepower. They passed through a market where vendors sold everything from alien artifacts to illegal weapons. A bar where fights broke out every few minutes. A residential section where the walls were so thin, Marcus could hear conversations in languages he did not recognize. Finally, they found the sector Saren had directed them to. It was quieter here, more organized. This was where the diplomats and information brokers operated. People who valued discretion and privacy. The meeting was set for a private chamber. Saren had arranged it all remotely using the code she had given Marcus. When they arrived, a security guard checked their identities. He was human, which surprised Marcus. The guard explained that the chamber was owned by a coalition of neutral parties. Species that wanted a place to talk without coalition oversight. The chamber was shielded from surveillance. No signals could get in or out. What was said inside stayed inside. The guard let them through. Inside the chamber, a dozen beings waited. Marcus recognized some of the species. 3 Valkorians, including Saren, who nodded at him from across the room. 2 Thalaxians whose ethical reputation preceded them. A representative from the Quarian Collective. Others he did not know. They all watched him with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. Saren spoke first. She introduced Marcus and explained that he carried evidence of coalition crimes. Serious crimes that violated the founding principles of the Alliance. She vouched for his credibility. Some of the diplomats seemed interested. Others looked skeptical. A Thalaxian named Vorin spoke next. His voice was formal and precise. He said the Thalaxians took accusations of ethical violations very seriously, but they needed proof. Not rumors, not speculation, hard evidence that could be verified. Marcus stepped forward. He pulled out the data chip. He explained what it contained. Video evidence of genetic experiments on humans, documentation of unauthorized military operations, financial records showing which officials were involved, names, dates, locations. Everything needed to prove that the coalition was not the benevolent organization it claimed to be. He handed the chip to Vorin. The Thalaxian inserted it into a portable terminal. The room fell silent as he began reviewing the data. Minutes passed. Vorin's expression changed from skepticism to shock to something like horror. He showed the terminal to the other Thalaxian. They conferred in their own language. Then Vorin looked at the rest of the group. He said the evidence was legitimate, beyond question. What he was seeing went against everything the coalition supposedly stood for. The Valkorians wanted to see next. Saren reviewed the data with tears in her eyes. She said this was worse than she had imagined, that the coalition had lost its way completely. A Quarian diplomat demanded access. When he saw the genetic experiments, he became physically ill. He had to sit down. The room erupted in conversation. Some diplomats were angry, demanding immediate action. Others were cautious, worried about the implications. A few seemed frightened. One diplomat from a species Marcus did not recognize argued that exposing this information would destabilize the entire coalition. That chaos would follow. That war was possible. Marcus waited for them to quiet down. Then he spoke. He said chaos was already here, that the coalition was built on lies and exploitation. That species joined believing in partnership and equality, but got something very different. That humanity was being used as raw material for weapons. That if it was happening to humans, it could happen to anyone. He asked them what they thought the coalition would do when other species became inconvenient. When their resources were needed. When their compliance could not be guaranteed. Would those species end up in labs too? Vorin stood up. He said Marcus was right, that the Thalaxians could not ignore this, that their government would withdraw from the coalition unless immediate reforms were made, that they would demand investigations and prosecutions. Saren agreed, said the Valkorians would support the Thalaxians, that this was a moment of truth for everyone. Before they could continue, the chamber door exploded inward. Coalition enforcers poured through, a dozen of them, heavily armed. They opened fire immediately. Marcus dove behind a table. Nina returned fire with her pistol. Alex grabbed Marcus and pulled him toward an emergency exit. Vorin was hit in the first volley. He went down hard. Zarin tried to reach him, but a plasma bolt caught her in the shoulder. She screamed. The room descended into chaos. Diplomats scrambled for cover. Some were hit. Some made it to exits. Marcus felt bullets whizzing past his head. Nina was shouting something, but he could not hear over the gunfire. Alex kicked open the emergency door and shoved Marcus through. Nina followed. They ran down a narrow corridor. Behind them, boots thundered in pursuit. Voices shouted orders in Coalition Standard. Alex led them through a service tunnel. Up a ladder. Through a maintenance hatch. They emerged in a loading bay. The Wanderer was docked 3 bays over. Marcus could see it through the windows. But enforcers were already moving to cut them off. Alex cursed. Said they needed another way. Nina pulled out her communicator and sent an emergency signal. Pierce would get the message. Whether he would respond was another question. They moved along the edge of the bay, staying low. Enforcers swept the area systematically. Marcus counted at least 20. Too many to fight. They reached a cargo container and hid behind it. Nina checked her weapon. She had 4 shots left. Alex had a knife. Marcus had nothing. They were trapped. Then Marcus heard it. The Wanderer's engines powering up. The ship lifted off its dock. Maneuvered through the bay. Pierce was bringing it to them. The enforcers noticed and opened fire. Plasma bolts scorched the Wanderer's hull. Pierce did not slow down. He brought the ship alongside the cargo container. The airlock opened. Alex jumped first. Nina pushed Marcus toward it. He jumped and barely made it. Nina leaped last. An enforcer tackled her midair. She kicked him off and fell into the airlock. Alex pulled her in and sealed the door. Pierce engaged the engines at full power. The Wanderer shot out of the bay. Coalition ships immediately gave chase. Pierce's voice came over the intercom. Told them to hold on. The ship twisted and dove. Station defenses opened fire trying to stop them. Pierce dodged most of it, but some shots hit. The ship shook violently. Marcus was thrown against a wall. Nina helped him up. They made it to the bridge. Pierce was flying with one hand and firing defensive weapons with the other. Caroline worked the navigation. Devon shouted damage reports. 3 coalition ships were on their tail. Faster ships, military grade. Pierce cursed. Said he could not outrun them. Alex asked if they could fight. Pierce laughed bitterly. Said not against those ships. They needed a miracle. The miracle came from an unexpected source. Other ships started launching from Terminus. Independent traders, smugglers, pirates. They moved to intercept the coalition ships. Pierce stared at the display in disbelief. Caroline reported that the independent ships were broadcasting a message. They were defending the Wanderer. Someone had put out a call. Someone had told them that Marcus was carrying information that affected everyone, that the coalition wanted him dead because he knew the truth. The independent ships were not military. They were not coordinated. But there were dozens of them. They swarmed the coalition ships, firing whatever weapons they had, creating chaos. Pierce used the distraction to break away. He pointed the Wanderer toward open space and engaged the hyperspace drive. Reality twisted. The coalition ships tried to follow, but the independents blocked them. Then the Wanderer was gone, shooting through hyperspace at speeds that made normal space travel look like standing still. In the silence that followed, everyone just breathed. Marcus felt like his heart was trying to escape his chest. Nina checked herself for injuries. Found a burn on her arm from a near miss. Alex looked pale but unhurt. Pierce finally spoke. Asked Marcus what the hell they had gotten into. Marcus told him the truth, everything about the research, about the experiments, about what they had been trying to do. Pierce listened and his expression grew darker. When Marcus finished, Pierce was quiet for a long time. Then he said something Marcus had not expected. He said Marcus had done the right thing, that someone needed to stand up to the coalition, that Pierce had suspected they were rotten for years but never had proof. He asked if the mission had been worth it. If they had accomplished anything before the attack. Marcus thought about it. The meeting had been cut short. But the diplomats had seen the evidence. Vorin might be dead, but others had escaped. They would talk. They would tell their governments. Nina interrupted, said she had uploaded the data to a distributed network during the meeting. Before the enforcers arrived, it was a backup plan, something she had set up with Blake. The information was now scattered across hundreds of independent servers, encrypted but accessible to anyone with the right codes. Saren had those codes. So did other diplomats who had attended the meeting. Marcus returned to Earth to find it transformed. The protests that had started as scattered demonstrations had grown into a massive movement. Millions of humans filled the streets demanding answers, demanding justice. The human government was in chaos. Officials who had cooperated with the coalition faced calls for resignation. Some were arrested. Others fled. The coalition tried to maintain control, but their authority was crumbling. Species that had once stood united were now divided. The Thalaxians formally withdrew from the Coalition Council. The Velcorians followed. Smaller species saw an opportunity and declared independence. Within weeks, the coalition that had dominated galactic politics for centuries was fracturing. It did not collapse entirely. Too many species still depended on the infrastructure it provided. But it was wounded. Weakened. No longer the unquestioned power it had been. Blake met Marcus at the Resistance headquarters. The facility was no longer hidden. It had moved above ground, operating openly now that public opinion had shifted. Blake looked tired but satisfied. He told Marcus that what they had accomplished was bigger than anyone had imagined. That humanity finally had a voice in galactic affairs. That other species were listening. Marcus asked about Zara and the twins. Blake smiled, said they were waiting for him. He led Marcus through the facility, past rooms full of people working on communications and coordination, past medical bays treating protesters injured in clashes with coalition loyalists, past planning rooms where the new human government was being formed. Finally, they reached a residential section. Blake stopped at a door, knocked. The door opened and Zara stood there. For a moment, she just stared. Then she threw her arms around Marcus. He held her tight, feeling her warmth, her relief, her gratitude. When they finally separated, she had tears in her eyes. She pulled him inside. Kai and Luna were bigger than Marcus remembered. They had grown so much in just a few weeks. Kai was trying to crawl. Luna was babbling nonsense that sounded almost like words. When they saw Marcus, they smiled, recognized him somehow. Luna reached out her little hands. Marcus picked her up carefully. She laughed. The sound was pure and perfect. It cut through all the darkness and pain of the past months, made everything worth it. Zara watched with a soft expression. She said the twins had missed him. Marcus said he had missed them too, more than he expected. Zara asked what happened on Terminus. Marcus told her everything. About the meeting. About the attack. About the escape. About Nina uploading the data. Zara listened, and when he finished, she just nodded. Said she knew he would find a way. That she had believed in him. Marcus did not know what to say to that. So he just held Luna and let himself feel something like peace. Over the next weeks, Marcus learned to live in a world that was rapidly changing. The new human government offered him a position, advisor on coalition affairs. His experience and knowledge would be valuable. Marcus considered it, then declined. He told them he had spent enough time in positions of power and influence. It had not made him happy before. It would not make him happy now. What he wanted was something simpler, something real. The officials respected his decision. They said if he ever changed his mind, the offer would stand. Blake tried to recruit him for the resistance. Said they needed leaders who understood sacrifice, who could inspire others. Marcus declined that too. Blake seemed disappointed but not surprised. He said Marcus had already done more than anyone had a right to ask. That he had earned the right to rest. But he also said Marcus would always be welcome. Always have a place with them if he needed it. Marcus spent time with Zara and the twins. They had been given quarters in the resistance facility, but it was temporary. Eventually, they would need to find somewhere permanent. Somewhere to build a real life. Marcus thought about the shack. About the land he had bought to disappear on. It seemed like a lifetime ago. A different person. But the land was still his. Still waiting. One evening, he asked Zara if she would want to go there. To rebuild. To make it into something better than a hiding place. Zara looked surprised. Then thoughtful. She asked if Marcus was sure. If he really wanted her and the twins there. Marcus told her the truth. That over the past months they had become something like family. That Kai and Luna needed a home. that he wanted to help give them that maybe in helping them he could heal some of his own wounds. Zara was quiet for a long time. Then she smiled, said yes. That sounded perfect. They left the city a week later. Blake arranged transportation. A small vehicle loaded with supplies, building materials, solar panels, water filtration systems, enough to turn the shack into a real home. The drive took 2 days. As they got farther from the city, the signs of civilization faded. The forest grew thicker, the air cleaner. When they finally reached the property, Marcus felt something unexpected. Not dread or sadness, but hope. The shack was still standing. Barely. But Marcus saw potential. He saw what it could become. They spent the first week just clearing the area, removing debris, cutting back overgrowth, planning where to build. Zara worked beside him. She was stronger now, healthier. The twins played nearby on a blanket, laughing at birds, grabbing at leaves. Marcus watched them when he thought Zara was not looking, saw them growing, thriving. It made something warm spread through his chest. Construction took months. Marcus had experience with building from his mining days. Zara learned quickly. They worked from dawn to dusk, tearing down the old structure, pouring foundations, raising walls, installing systems. Blake sent help occasionally. Resistance members who needed a break from the chaos of the city. They would stay a few days, help with heavy lifting, share meals, tell stories, then move on. Slowly the house took shape. It was not fancy, not large, but it was solid, well built, a place that could withstand storms, that could protect the people inside. Marcus made sure of that. When the roof finally went on, Marcus stood back and looked at what they had created. It was real, permanent, a home. He felt Elena's presence then, not his pain but his warmth, like she was proud of him, like she approved. Life settled into a new rhythm. Marcus woke with the sun, made coffee while Zara fed the twins. They worked on various projects around the property, a garden, a workshop, a play area for Kai and Luna. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the forest. Sometimes they talked about their pasts, about their hopes, about what the future might hold. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. The twins grew bigger. Kai took his first steps. Luna said her first word. Time passed in the way it does when life is good. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Marcus found himself smiling more, laughing at the twins' antics, feeling genuine happiness. He had thought that was gone forever. But Zara and the children had brought it back, not by replacing what he lost, but by giving him something new to care about. One evening, Zara asked Marcus what he thought about the future, about them. Marcus knew what she was really asking. Their relationship had grown closer over the months. What had started as mutual survival had become friendship, then something deeper. They had not talked about it directly. Both were damaged in their own ways, both afraid of moving too fast. But the question hung between them now. Marcus thought about how to answer, then decided to just be honest. He said he cared about her, about Kai and Luna, that they had become the most important thing in his life, that he wanted to build a future with them if she was willing. Zara reached over and took his hand, said she felt the same, that Marcus had saved them, not just physically but in every way that mattered, that he had given them hope when they had none, that she could not imagine a future without him in it. They did not rush into anything. Both understood that healing took time, that building something real required patience, but they moved forward together. Small steps, holding hands while watching the twins play, sharing longer conversations, planning improvements to the house, making decisions as a unit. Marcus had not expected to find love again, had not been looking for it, but it found him anyway, in the most unlikely place, with a woman he had almost walked away from, with children who were not his by blood but were his in every other way. The galaxy outside was still changing, still healing from the wounds of coalition corruption, but Marcus was healing too, finding purpose, finding family, finding himself again. Blake visited sometimes, brought news from the resistance. The new human government was stabilizing, forming alliances with other species that had left the coalition, creating a new framework for cooperation based on actual equality. The old coalition still existed, but it was a shadow of what it had been. Many species had formed their own alliances. The galaxy was more fractured but also more honest. Blake said historians were already calling it the Great Reformation. That humanity's stand against the coalition had inspired others to demand better. That Marcus had played a key role in that. Marcus did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had been given a second chance, who had found redemption in the most unexpected way. Blake understood. He said that was what made Marcus different, that he did not do it for glory or recognition. He did it because it was right, because people needed help. That was the kind of person the galaxy needed more of. When Blake left, Marcus stood on the porch and looked at the forest. 2 years passed on the property. The house was finished and felt like a real home now. Marcus had built an addition for the twins. Separate rooms so they each had their own space. A larger kitchen where the family gathered for meals. A study where Zara had resumed her research. She was working on legitimate medical applications now, using what she had learned about human genetics to develop treatments for diseases. She published papers that were read across the galaxy. Her reputation was being rebuilt, this time on her own terms. Marcus spent his days maintaining the property and teaching the twins. Kai was 3 now and endlessly curious. He wanted to know how everything worked. Why birds flew, where rain came from, how plants grew. Marcus answered as best he could. Found that teaching gave him purpose. Luna was quieter but equally intelligent. She loved stories. Marcus would read to her for hours. Old books he found in abandoned libraries. Tales of adventure and courage. She hung on every word. The galaxy continued to change. The old coalition had reformed into something new. The Galactic Assembly, they called it. Species joined as equals, each with a vote, each with a voice. Humans were among the founding members. So were the Thalaxians, the Velcorians, the Quarians, others who believed in actual cooperation. It was not perfect. There were still disputes, still conflicts, but it was better, more honest. The Assembly created oversight committees to prevent the abuses that had happened before. They opened the genetic research labs to independent inspectors, found evidence of crimes worse than anyone had imagined. Trials were held. Officials were prosecuted. Some went to prison, others were exiled. Justice was slow, but it was happening. Humanity had proven that speaking truth to power could work, that standing up against corruption could make a difference. Other species took note, began demanding more from their own leaders. It was a new era. One morning, Marcus received an unexpected message, an invitation to attend an assembly summit as an observer. The summit was being held on a neutral station. Representatives from dozens of species would attend. They wanted Marcus there because of his role in exposing the coalition crimes, because his actions had sparked the reforms. Marcus showed the invitation to Zara. She encouraged him to go, said it was important, that people needed to see that ordinary humans could make extraordinary differences. Marcus was reluctant. He had built a quiet life here. Going back into the galactic spotlight felt dangerous. But Zara was right. This was bigger than his comfort. He agreed to attend. Blake arranged transportation and security. Marcus would not be alone. Nina and Alex both volunteered to accompany him. They had stayed with the resistance and become important figures in the new order. But they remembered Marcus, remembered what they had been through together. The journey to the summit station took a week. Marcus used the time to prepare, to read reports about the current state of galactic affairs, to understand what had changed and what challenges remained. When they arrived, the station was impressive, newly built, designed specifically for diplomatic functions. Large halls where delegates could meet, secure chambers for private negotiations, living quarters for hundreds of beings. Marcus felt out of place immediately. He was not a diplomat, not a politician, just a man who had tried to do the right thing. But people recognized him, whispered as he passed. Some looked at him with respect, others with suspicion. Humans were still not universally trusted. Old prejudices died hard. Marcus ignored the stares and focused on why he was there. The summit opened with speeches from various leaders. The human representatives spoke about humanity's commitment to ethical governance, about learning from past mistakes, about building a better future. The Thalaxian delegate discussed the importance of accountability, of ensuring that the crimes of the old coalition were never repeated. The Velcorian speaker emphasized truth and transparency, said that secrets were what had allowed corruption to flourish. That openness was the only path forward. Marcus sat in the observer section and listened. It was all very formal, very political, but underneath the diplomatic language was genuine hope. These species really believed they could build something better. That cooperation was possible, that the galaxy could change. On the second day, Marcus was approached by someone unexpected. A Krivati, the same species that had hunted Zara, that had attacked them at the shack. Marcus tensed. The Krivati introduced himself as Commander Verak. He said he needed to speak with Marcus privately. Marcus hesitated but agreed. They went to a quiet corner of one of the halls. Verak spoke carefully, said that the Krivati had been among the most loyal coalition enforcers, that they had carried out many of the operations that were now considered crimes, that his species was struggling with guilt and shame. He wanted Marcus to know that not all Krivati had agreed with what they were ordered to do, that some had questioned, that those who spoke out were punished. Verak said he was one of the ones who stayed silent, who followed orders, who convinced himself it was necessary. He wanted Marcus to know he regretted it, that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make amends. Marcus did not know what to say. Part of him was angry. This species had terrorized Zara, had tried to kill them, but looking at Verak he saw genuine remorse, saw someone struggling with their own demons. Marcus told Verak he appreciated the apology, that forgiveness was complicated, that it would take time, but that the fact Verak was trying mattered. That acknowledgement of wrongdoing was the first step toward change. Verak nodded slowly, said the Krivati were working to reform their military, to instill values beyond blind obedience, to teach soldiers that some orders should not be followed. It was difficult. Cultural change always was, but they were trying. Marcus told him to keep trying, that the galaxy needed species willing to admit their mistakes and grow from them. When Verak left, Marcus felt strange. He had not expected to have that conversation, had not expected to find common ground with someone from a species he had feared. But maybe that was what progress looked like. Difficult conversations, uncomfortable truths, slow growth. On the final day of the summit there was a ceremony. Awards were given to individuals who had contributed to the reform movement. Marcus was among them. He tried to decline but was told attendance was mandatory. When his name was called, he walked to the stage feeling awkward. The assembly chair presented him with a medal, said that Marcus Hayes represented the best of humanity, that his courage had inspired countless others, that his actions had helped reshape the galaxy. Marcus accepted the medal, but when it was his turn to speak, he kept it brief. He said he was not a hero, that he had been pushed into action by circumstances, by people who needed help, that any decent person would have done the same. He said the real heroes were people like Zara, who risked everything to expose the truth, like Blake and Lisa who built the resistance, like the diplomats who chose principle over politics, like ordinary people across the galaxy who demanded better from their leaders. The audience was silent for a moment. Then they began applauding, not the polite applause of formal ceremonies, but genuine appreciation. Marcus left the stage quickly. He did not enjoy being the center of attention, but he understood why it mattered. People needed symbols, needed stories of regular individuals making a difference. If his story could inspire even one person to stand up against injustice, then the discomfort was worth it. After the ceremony, Marcus was approached by Saren. The elderly Velkorian looked older than he remembered, more tired, but her eyes were still sharp. She said she had followed his journey with interest, that she was proud of what he had accomplished. Marcus thanked her, said none of it would have been possible without her help, without her contacts and courage. Saren waved that away, said she had simply done what any person of conscience would do, that the real test was not starting the fight but continuing it when things got difficult. She asked about Zara and the twins. Marcus told her they were doing well, that they had built a good life. Saren smiled, said that was the best possible outcome, that after everything they had been through they deserved peace. She gave Marcus a small device, said it contained contact information for various allies across the galaxy, people who believed in the new vision, who could be trusted if Marcus ever needed help again. Marcus put it in his pocket. Hoped he would never need to use it, but was grateful to have it. The journey home felt different than the journey out. Marcus was tired but satisfied. He had seen with his own eyes that change was happening, that their sacrifice had meant something. When he finally arrived back at the property, Zara and the twins were waiting on the porch. Kai ran to him shouting. Luna followed more carefully. Marcus scooped them both up, felt their weight, their warmth, their joy at seeing him. Zara stood back and smiled. When Marcus finally put the twins down, she walked over and kissed him. It was still new between them, still tentative, but it was real. That night after the twins were asleep, Marcus and Zara sat on the porch. He told her about the summit, about the ceremony, about his conversation with Verak. Zara listened carefully. Then she said something that surprised him. She said she was glad Verak had apologized, that holding on to hate would poison them. 5 years after Marcus first found Zara hiding in the forest, life had settled into something beautiful. The twins were 7 years old now. Kai had grown tall for his age with his father's serious eyes. He spent hours in the workshop Marcus had built, helping fix things and asking endless questions about how machines worked. Luna was smaller but fierce. She loved reading and had already worked through every book Marcus could find for her. She wanted to be a scientist like her mother. Zara worked from a laboratory she had built in a converted barn. She had assembled a small team of researchers who came and went. They were developing treatments based on the human genetic adaptability she had once been forced to weaponize. Now it saved lives instead of taking them. Her work was recognized across the assembly. She received offers to join prestigious institutions but always declined. She had everything she needed right here. Marcus had taken on a new role. He taught engineering courses remotely to students across human space. Young people who wanted to learn asteroid mining or habitat construction, or any of the practical skills that made space colonization possible. He was good at it. Patient, clear. He made complex concepts understandable. His students loved him. Some visited the property to learn hands-on. Marcus would take them into the forest and show them how to build with limited resources, how to solve problems creatively, how to adapt when things went wrong. These were the lessons that had saved his life more than once. He wanted to pass them on. One of his students was a young woman named Claire who reminded Marcus of Elena. Same determination. Same brilliance. She wanted to reopen the asteroid mines using safer methods than Marcus had pioneered. He helped her develop the plans, introduced her to contacts in the industry, felt pride when she secured funding. This was legacy. Teaching the next generation to do better than he had done. The property had grown too. Marcus and Zara had purchased the surrounding land as it became available. Now they had over 100 acres. Enough space for the twins to explore. Enough privacy to live without interference. They had built guest houses for when friends visited. Blake came every few months. He had retired from active resistance work and now served in the human government as an advisor on security matters. Lisa had become a general in the reformed human military. She stopped by occasionally with her partner and their daughter. Malik ran a training program for young soldiers, teaching them ethics alongside tactics. Dr. Liu had won awards for his work on peaceful applications of quantum physics. They all stayed in touch, united by what they had been through together, by the knowledge that they had changed history. One afternoon, Marcus was working in the garden when Kai came running. He said there was someone at the gate, a visitor. Marcus was not expecting anyone. He walked to the entrance and found a young Kravathi standing there. She introduced herself as Syrinx, daughter of Commander Verak. Marcus remembered the name, the Kravathi officer who had apologized at the summit years ago. Syrinx explained that her father had passed away 6 months earlier. Before he died, he had asked her to deliver something to Marcus. She handed him a data chip, said her father had spent his final years documenting Kravathi involvement in coalition crimes. Names, operations, everything. He wanted Marcus to have it, to ensure the truth was preserved. Marcus took the chip carefully, asked why Verak had chosen him. Syrinx said because her father believed Marcus would know what to do with it, that he was someone who could be trusted with difficult truths. Marcus invited her inside, offered her tea. They talked for hours, about her father's guilt and redemption, about the challenges the Kravathi faced in reforming their culture, about her own work trying to bridge understanding between species. When she left, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility. He gave the chip to Zara. Together, they decided to share it with the Assembly Historical Commission. Not for punishment. That time had passed. But for record, so future generations would know what happened, would learn from it. That evening, Marcus and Zara sat on the porch as they often did. The twins were inside doing homework. The forest was quiet except for the sounds of evening birds. Zara asked Marcus if he ever regretted the path his life had taken. If he wished things had been different. Marcus thought about it honestly. About Elena and the life they had planned. About the fortune he had lost. About the pain he had endured. Then he looked at the house. At the life he had built here. At the woman beside him who had become his partner in every way that mattered. At the twins who called him Dad even though he had never asked them to. He told Zara no. He did not regret it. Every painful step had led him here. Had made him who he was. Had given him this family. This purpose. This peace. Zara smiled. Said she felt the same. That finding him in that forest had saved her life. Not just physically, but emotionally. That he had given her and the twins a future when they had none. The galaxy continued to evolve. New species joined the assembly. Old conflicts were resolved through diplomacy instead of force. Human colonies spread across dozens of systems. Some succeeded, some failed. But humanity kept trying, kept adapting, kept proving that they belonged among the stars. The genetic research programs were transformed into legitimate medical initiatives that benefited all species. Laws were passed to prevent the abuses of the past. Oversight committees were given real power. It was not perfect. There were still problems. Still injustice, still corruption in places. But it was better. And people kept working to make it better still. Marcus received updates from his network of contacts. From Saren, who had become a respected elder statesman. From former resistance members now in positions of influence. From students who had gone on to do remarkable things. Each message was a reminder that small actions could ripple outward. That one person's courage could inspire thousands. On the 10th anniversary of exposing the coalition crimes, there was a ceremony at the assembly headquarters. Marcus was invited again. This time he brought his family. Zara and the twins. They traveled together. Kai and Luna were excited to see alien worlds, to ride on starships, to experience things most humans never would. The ceremony honored all those who had contributed to the reforms. Marcus was given another award, but this time he did not feel awkward accepting it. Because he was not alone. Zara stood beside him. The twins watched from the audience. Blake and his team were there. Serene and other allies. They had all played their part. The recognition was not just for Marcus, but for everyone who had refused to accept injustice. Who had stood up when it mattered. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Species from across the galaxy mingled, shared food and stories. Marcus watched Kai and Luna interact with alien children, saw them laugh and play without fear or prejudice. This was the future he had fought for. Not just political reform, but genuine connection between species. Real understanding. An elderly Thaloxian approached Marcus during the reception. He was a historian writing a comprehensive account of the Reformation period. He wanted to interview Marcus, to capture his perspective for future generations. Marcus agreed, but only on one condition, that the historian also interview the others. Zara, Blake, Lisa, Malik, the diplomats who had risked their careers, the ordinary people who had protested and demanded change. The historian agreed, said that was exactly his intention. That history was not made by individuals but by movements, by collective action, by people choosing to do what was right even when it was difficult. Marcus liked that perspective. It felt true. Over the next weeks, the historian conducted his interviews. When he was done, he told Marcus that what struck him most was how accidental it all seemed. How a chance meeting in a forest had sparked events that reshaped the galaxy. Marcus said maybe that was how change always happened. Not through grand plans, but through small moments of human connection. Through choosing compassion over indifference. Through refusing to look away from suffering. The family returned home after 2 weeks. The property felt welcoming, familiar. Marcus realized this was truly where he belonged now. Not in fancy ceremonies or political meetings, but here, in this place he had built with his own hands. With the family he had found and chosen, he resumed his teaching, his work with students, his quiet life. But he also understood something important, that he would always be connected to the larger story, that what he had done would echo forward, that the choices he made still mattered. When young people reached out asking for advice, he responded. When causes needed support, he gave it. When injustice appeared, he spoke against it. Not because he wanted attention, but because having found his voice, he could not stay silent. That was what Elena had taught him, what Zara had reminded him, What the twins would learn by example. That privilege came with responsibility, that those who could help had an obligation to do so. Years continued to pass. Kai and Luna grew into remarkable young people. Kai became an engineer like Marcus, working on habitat designs for new colony worlds. He had his father's practical skills and his mother's scientific mind. Luna pursued medicine and genetics, following in Zara's footsteps but forging her own path. She was brilliant and compassionate, exactly what the galaxy needed. Marcus and Zara watched them with pride, knowing they had given these children something precious.